Okay. Right. By my watch, it's 8 o'clock. I do want to be respectful of everybody's time, and anybody who joins us late, don't worry. There's going to be a replay. We'll send out everybody who, hey, Brandon, how are you? Everybody who signed up for this will get a copy of the replay. It is recording. So with that said, let me share my screen, get all my slides ready. And you should be able to see now my screen with me up in the top right hand corner. I hope that's the case. And let's get started. So scoring with sponsors. What's the thinking behind scoring with sponsors? Well, as I said earlier, somewhat inspired by some folks who really, that we work with, who do a really fantastic job of selling sponsorships, servicing those sponsors, and getting renewals year after year, and building a very solid revenue stream from that. We have this Facebook group that we've been running now for the last several months. And if you're not a member, you should join. It's a great resource for people who run tournaments to ask questions and generally interact with one another. But Facebook allows you in that entry process, as you ask to join the group, Facebook allows you to put some questions up there. We always put 3 questions up there. Who are you? What is your tournament? How long have you been involved with it? And what is your biggest challenge? And 9 times out of 10, maybe not quite that many, but 7 times out of 10 perhaps, we get some kind of answer to that question of, we need to generate more revenue, we need more sponsors, we can't attract more teams because we're maxed out, but we need more profits. And it stands to reason that people are struggling with sponsorships in this industry, which is very strange because so many related industries do so much better with them. So we put this presentation together, we put some resources together that we hope is going to help that. So we've got this presentation, 6 easy steps to increasing your tournament's profitability. Okay, in other words, how to make your tournament more profitable without having to add more teams, having to rent more fields, which of course is expense. You need more volunteers, more money, having to hire more refs. We all know how hard it is to get refs, and having to sell more t-shirts. So in other words, what we're hoping that we can provide for you here is a systemized approach to attracting corporate support, which in my opinion, as I said earlier, is the largest untapped revenue source in the entire soccer tournament industry. Notwithstanding some people who do a terrific job, most tournaments really struggle in this area, and they're leaving money on the table. So you are in the right place if your tournament is otherwise successful and it attracts plenty of teams, but you just don't seem to be able to crack the code here on the selling of corporate sponsorships. This is hopefully here for you if you're in that category. You're in the right place if you're frustrated that you feel you're leaving money on the table, but you just don't have the expertise, you don't have the time or the confidence. Now, I believe time sometimes is related to confidence. You make the excuse that you don't have the time because you don't have the confidence. And that's a very common thing I've seen in sales reps who don't have a whole lot of confidence, don't really know what they're doing. And they just say, oh, I don't have time, I don't have time. What that really means is they're scared. So you're in the right place if you're a tournament director who already has too much on your plate. So you're looking for some quick and easy solution, preferably something that you could outsource to somebody else. And we think this is something that you might be able to do that with. And you're in the right place if you already do have some advertisers, probably advertisers, not sponsors. There is a difference. We'll talk about that in a moment. And you're looking to add more, and you're looking to try and get some bigger names and more creative sponsorship proposals and packages out there to generate more revenue. You're in the wrong place, however, if your tournament is brand new or it's struggling for whatever reason, you don't have enough teams, and you need corporate sponsors to cover your cash shortfalls. That's never a great place to start a conversation with a sponsor from. I've been there when I used to sell sponsorships for a semi-pro team, and it's basically the "we're broke, do you want to sponsor us" model, and it's horrible. I've been there, and you don't want to be there. And I don't think sponsorships is the answer to your question. You need to solve some of those other problems first. You're in the wrong place if you want the revenue that comes with sponsorships, but all you really feel like doing in order to justify that expense is stick a logo somewhere, put a field sign up, and that's the end of it. Corporate sponsorships and doing sponsorships well, particularly in the sports arena, requires a lot more than just sticking someone's logo on a website and cashing a check. So you're also in the wrong place if you do not have any capacity whatsoever to service those sponsors. We all know tournament directors are busy. We all know that handling deliverables is just another thing that gets put on someone's to-do list. And if you don't have someone who can do that, or if you don't have any capacity within the organization of the tournament to make sure that you are actually servicing these sponsors and giving them what it is you promised them and giving them what it is you've sold them, remember you've taken money from them, then this is not the right presentation for you. You really do have to make sure that a bunch of things are taken care of before you start going out there and trying to get more sponsors on board. And the number one thing is making sure there's someone in your organization and some process in place for making sure the deliverables actually do get handled. So what would your tournament look like? Put our rose-tinted glasses on and look at what could be possible if every small to medium-sized business in your community knew about your event, liked what it is your event stood for and what it does for the community, and was really lining up, so to speak, to help you out in any which way they can with some kind of corporate support. That would be really cool, wouldn't it? Several large global brands were sponsoring you. And that, of course, adds a huge prestige to your event. And there's a lot of people out there who believe it's really, really difficult to get the big global brands to sponsor you. Some people have this notion that if you want Coca-Cola to sponsor your tournament, you've got to get on a plane and fly to Atlanta and traipse up to their head office and speak to someone in corporate. It's not the case. It's a lot easier than a lot of people think to get big brands to sponsor your tournament. What would your tournament look like if, hang on, my clicker's not working. Oh, there it is. There it is. If you had thousands, maybe tens of thousands of additional dollars without actually having to increase the number of fields, teams, reps, etc., as we talked about earlier, that would be a very nice situation. All of your corporate relationships operated on a win-win-win basis. And this is the vernacular of the industry these days. It used to be that people just were concerned about a win-win situation. Does the sponsor get what they pay for? Does the tournament get their money? But people now are starting to think in terms of win-win-win. The sponsor needs to win, the rights holder, the organization, the host needs to win, but the attendee also needs to get something out of this. They don't just want to be completely bombarded with messages of marketing and selling all throughout the time that they're there. And what would your tournament look like if your sponsors were so happy with their involvement that renewals were automatic? Of course, there's no such thing as automatic. There's no guarantees, but virtually automatic. You're doing your job. You are servicing them well. They are happy with their involvement in your organization, and that's hopefully something we can help you accomplish. So here's what we're going to go over. 6 easy steps that any tournament, this is important, any tournament can take to boost their sponsorship revenue. The 3 types of corporate support and how recognizing the difference between them can have a big impact on your productivity as a salesperson and your success overall of your programs. How to pitch your offer to each different category, because it does vary depending on who we're pitching and what level we're pitching them at, and a surefire system for making sure that all of your sponsors are happy and almost guaranteed, almost keyword, to renew. And if you stay to the end, do stay to the end, and we'll set you up with a subscription to Tournament Director magazine. I have long believed that this industry is ready for its own trade magazine. We launched this a few years ago. We've now relaunched it, and we're working on issue 2 right now, and we're very excited about it. So we'll set you up with a subscription for that. Stay to the end, okay? So does this sound like you? You know there are sponsors out there. You've really never sold sponsorships before. You're not sure where to begin because that's often the first big barrier. I don't even know where to start, so let's not even bother to try. So does that sound like you? Or you've never put any kind of proposal like this together. You don't really know what a sponsorship proposal even looks like, what to include, what not to include, and you certainly have no idea what to charge. You think it's hard enough finding people to do easy jobs, right? Like picking up trash and lining fields and field marshalling, let alone the far more difficult task of selling sponsorships. I believe that you can find someone to sell sponsorships, and particularly if you can provide them with the signposts and the blueprint for how to actually do it, it's a lot easier than some people think to find people to go out there and sell sponsorships for you. And even if you were able to sell sponsorships, you're not sure you're able to handle the deliverables. So we did already talk about that. But the point is, it's not necessarily a typical tournament director's fault that a tournament isn't doing well in the sponsorship space. I believe that the host organizations make this mistaken belief that the skill sets required to run a tournament are very similar to the skill sets required to sell sponsorships. And in fact, I've done both. And I'm the opposite to most tournament directors. I'm really big at thinking expansively and getting creative and having great outside the box ideas, but I'm terrible at making sure all the details are taken care of. Like, where's the ice? I'd lie awake at night worrying about whether the ice was there or not, or whether the fields were lined, or did I actually call Joe and make sure the nets are set up. So I'm more of the guy who could do the sponsorship sales, but not very good at running a tournament, not very good at crossing items off a to-do list. Tournament directors, I believe, the vast majority of them, are the opposite. They're very, very good at handling details, but the idea of going in and pitching a crazy idea to a sponsor or a potential sponsor is something that is just not in their skill set. So that's part of the problem that we're dealing with here. Most tournament directors don't have time. We all know how busy they are. And if they want to run a successful event and make sure all those I's are dotted and all those T's are crossed, then it's not realistic to expect them to go out there and sell sponsorships as well. And yeah, most non-profit organizations are not really set up to handle sponsor relations. There's a language of marketing that they don't necessarily understand. There's expectations from dealing with people in the corporate world that a lot of people in non-profits don't necessarily appreciate, and they're not really set up necessarily to handle sponsor relations in that way. But here's the thing. Selling sponsorships is a lot easier than most people think it is, particularly if you know what you're doing and got someone to hold your hand and help you through it. And just one small shift in mindset plus an easy to follow system could turn sponsorships literally into the second largest revenue stream of your tournament. After team registrations, sponsorships could be quite easily the next largest source of revenue for your event. All you need is a good understanding of what it is you're offering, which means your audience and your inventory. Clear focused prospect list, in fact 3 of them, we'll talk about that in a moment. A system for reaching out to those prospects and making the right offers to the right prospects, and again we'll talk about that. Process for delivering what you promised, and a follow-up sequence so that you handle, everyone ends up realizing that you did in fact do what you said you were going to do. That's important, of course, and hopefully that leads to pretty much automatic renewals. So, and that mindset shift is really just this. It's just the belief that it can be done. There are so many tournaments out there, and I hear from them every day. I've got a list of them right here from some questions that we sent out an email from early in the week. They just don't believe it can be done, and that's crazy because there are literally thousands of organizations out there, not just sports organizations, but all kinds of corporate events and non-profit events and arts festivals and music festivals, all kinds of things going on all over the world, and many of them are generating literally billions of dollars in sponsorships. And this is especially true in sports because we all know that every sporting event we ever watch on television is completely supported by sponsorships. All our favorite sports teams have got some kind of logo or jersey message or whatever. And so in sports, it's a particularly strong area. And even within the very specific space of youth soccer tournaments, where I feel there's a real problem in this area, that said, we do know of very, very successful tournaments out there that do a terrific job. Some people on this very call who do an absolutely fantastic job with sponsors. So if they can do it, so can you. And that's what I'm hoping we can help you to get to. So I'm going to take a sip of water. Let me tell you a little bit about me. I don't want to spend too long on this because no one likes talking about themselves, do they, after all? But anyway, I just want to give you a little bit of a sense of where I come from, what my background is, and what it is that makes me think I can help you in the area of sponsorships. I am, in fact, a 25, maybe closer to 30-year media sales veteran, magazines mostly, but other kinds of media too. Way back in the day when soccer was in its infancy, I actually founded the Cape Cod Crusaders soccer team, the Worcester Wildfire, and the Boston Renegades. Semi-pro teams, all in the Boston area. And after that, I got involved with Soccer Tournament Guide and Game Day Mobile Marketing. So I now have 2 businesses that service the tournament space. And I am currently the Director of Marketing for the Cape Cod Challenge Cup, which is our hometown tournament here in Sandwich, Massachusetts. In fact, it's a reprise, if you will, of a role I had about 15 years ago when my kids were playing soccer. I used to sell advertising in their little program book, and I stopped getting involved in the tournament for many years. Now I'm back, and that's a great place for me to be getting some really good hands-on experience in what the world is like now. So how did I get to be an expert in this area? Well, I'll tell you my life story in 5 slides, no more, I promise. As you could tell, I'm English, had a fairly ordinary childhood in England in the 1960s and 70s. Sometime around about 1968, I met the first true love of my life, which was Manchester United Football Club, sent to me from heaven. And that was really how I got involved in soccer, watching the European Cup final in 1968 on my dad's lap. But in the 80s, when I grew up, I had a few false starts. I did some crazy things when I was young in my career. I played in a rock and roll band, and I spent some time serving behind a bar, became an accountant for a short time, did a little bit of sales. But eventually, I found a very, very good and satisfying career in the magazine industry. And I actually had a job with Cosmopolitan magazine in London. This is Cosmopolitan's cover from March of 1989, which is when I started working there. And I was all set for a long and happy career in Cosmopolitan. I was really quite happy there, except I also met at that time and married the second major love of my life, my lovely wife, Karen. And because she was American, we had to live somewhere, right? So we were either going to live in the UK or live in the US. We chose the US and moved to Massachusetts. So I carried on in publishing and switched to the Atlantic Monthly, and again had a terrific career there, loved working there, very satisfying. But I started to figure out that the people who made real money in this business were not the accounting people, which is what I did when I was at Cosmopolitan, and they're not the production people who deal with printers and ink and paper and that stuff. Which is what I did when I was at the Atlantic Monthly. The real money was made by the sales reps. And I was just starting to think, maybe I could swivel into selling. I'd done some selling back in London. Maybe I could swivel into selling and make a bit more money. And then I had this brilliant idea. Bing! Why don't we start a professional soccer team on Cape Cod? What a great idea, huh? Well, actually, it wasn't. It was a terrible idea. I wanted to call this team the Cape Crusaders, which I thought was a terrific name for a minor league soccer team. But they said, no one would know where we're from if we call it the Cape Crusaders. Let's call it the Cape Cod Crusaders, which kind of spoiled the joke, right? That was supposed to be the Batman thing. But nonetheless, Cape Crusaders was never to be. Cape Cod Crusaders was actually a reasonably successful soccer team. They eventually won the national championship in the USISL, so it was a successful team, and we did pretty well with it. This was not so much. This was a tough sell, the Worcester Wildfire in central Massachusetts. That was not such a great idea. But then we did start a women's team called the Boston Renegades, and frankly became the flagship team of the W League, what was the W League back in the days. For a very short time, folks used to look to us and say, wow, you do such a great job running that team. We had big crowds, we had lots of sponsors. It was a really terrific exercise. So the thing is, when I'm a president and general manager of a professional soccer team, you'd think I'd spend my life whining and dining players and agents and negotiating contracts, but that really wasn't the case. Back in those days, you had one job and one job only, and that is to bring money in so that we could keep the lights on. This was a tough, tough business to be in, and you had to figure out a way to sell stuff, whether it be camps or tickets or sponsorships. And I was new to selling. I had very little experience in selling. And not only did I actually have to sell all this stuff, but I actually had people working for me selling stuff too. So I was a salesman and a sales manager for the first time in my career. And it was a very, very steep learning curve. We really had to figure some stuff out very quickly. And it wasn't terribly unusual for the owners to come to us and say, okay, we need you to sell a sponsorship before the end of the week because we can't make payroll if you don't. And I do remember actually having to call someone up, someone with whom we'd negotiated a payment plan and say, hey, Frank, you know that payment plan we discussed? Could I possibly come over this afternoon and pick up a check, even though you're not supposed to pay it until next month? And he was very understanding about it, but he didn't come back the following year. But eventually we did manage to get some good sponsors in. Ford Dealers of New England, I'll tell you about that one because it was a good deal. Cliff Bars, when they were very new, just based out of Chelsea, Massachusetts, just north of Boston. Ben & Jerry's, Coca-Cola, McDonald's, Pepsi-Cola, a bunch of different sponsors that we were able to work with. So eventually I got back into magazines, and through Soccer New England, which was a successful little small circulation, but quite a well-known magazine in New England, I purchased that from its publisher, its founder, and got involved with the tournament industry because they were the people who were advertising in that publication. When we took that online, we did do soccernewengland.com, but we also made a fateful decision that we would do soccertournamentguide.com, which is really what got us into the national global tournament industry, so to speak. Up until that point, the advertisers in Soccer New England, as you would expect, were all New England-based tournaments. Soccer Tournament Guide gave us the ability to go out nationally and internationally, got involved in the app business, and now we have Tournament Director Magazine, the Tournament Talk community, apps, and all kinds of other things around the running of tournaments. So yeah, I know a little bit about sports marketing. Let's just put it that way. So, what about those 6 easy steps? First of all, identify your audience. Second, create 3 separate prospect lists. I've always found this easy. If we can get in our own mind the difference between the 3 sets of prospects, that's usually very helpful. Assess what inventory you have to sell. Follow a system for reaching out to those prospects. Create a process for dealing with deliverables, which is really, really important. And follow up after the event for debrief and renewal. 6 steps. If you follow these 6 steps, and I'll go deep into some of them. We don't have time to go deep into all of them, but a couple of them I do want to talk a little bit more about and just list them in a slide like this. So let's just go through these one at a time, some of them quite quickly, some of them a little bit deeper. First of all, identify your audience. Now, I'm sorry to say this, but most people you're going to be talking to are not terribly interested in your tournament. They're not terribly interested in you, although you having a good relationship with them is important. They're probably not terribly interested in soccer either. What they're interested in is your audience, and most specifically, they're interested in how passionately your audience feels about your event, what that event actually means to them, and they're hoping to try and capture some of that passion so the people that sponsor the event get some of the reflected glory from the love and passion that people have for the event. Why I am passionate about Manchester United, and therefore certain sponsors hope that that passion will rub off on their products if they sponsor Manchester United. What they're really buying is access to your audience, so it really does behoove you to know as much as possible about your audience. Let me just see if my clicker stopped again. Let's just go back again. There we go. So your first job as someone who's selling sponsorships is to find out as much as possible about your audience so that you can pass that information on to prospects and have intelligent conversations with them about things like demographics, psychographics, household income, how far they've traveled to come to the event, all that good stuff. So you need a well-constructed survey. Now, some of you may have seen the blog post I put together the other day about customer satisfaction surveys. That's not what this is. Customer satisfaction survey is a chance for your customers to tell you how great a job you're doing or how terrible a job you're doing so that you can do a better job next time. That's not what this is. This is something that you have to try and get some pretty personal information from people. Try and get some sense of what their household income is. Try and get some sense of whether they're college educated or not. Try and get some sense of where they live, what kind of neighborhoods they live in, what number of children they have, whether those children are going to go on to college. These are the kinds of questions you need to be putting together in some kind of customer service, so not customer satisfaction, but a customer survey. And we'll help you with some of that stuff if needed. But that is definitely the kind of information that a tournament sponsor is going to want to know about. Not just demographic information, but psychographic information. And there's a difference between the two. And psychographic is really more about what do they feel about your tournament? What is the fear? One, demographics is really just facts and figures, whereas psychographic is thoughts and feelings. So bear that in mind. And what you really need to do is be thinking seriously about putting some kind of a survey together so that you can get that information about your audience so that you can pass that information on to prospective sponsors. Let's talk about the 3 separate prospect lists. Now, the caveat here is to the outside world, they're just advertisers, sponsors, what have you. It doesn't really matter. I'm talking about internally, how you think about them, how you approach them, how you price them. And in my opinion, and I found this always very helpful when I'm dealing with my staff and myself on putting these packages together, if we think of these as 3 different categories. The first category is donors. These are not necessarily people who have a good, compelling business reason to work with you, but they like what you do, they like what you stand for, maybe they like soccer, what have you. Advertisers, these are people who are just buying media. They're interested in numbers, they're interested in getting people into their store or to their restaurant or to their attraction, and they're just trying to get a message in front of your audience. And then there's sponsors, and there's a whole different definition, in my opinion, of what a sponsor actually is. So let's talk about these one at a time. The definition of a donor is people who will give you money because they like you. They don't necessarily have a compelling business reason for giving you money. They just like what it is you stand for. Maybe what you do for the economy. Maybe the owner does love soccer. I said earlier they don't really care much about soccer, but some people do, and they sponsor you for that reason. And I've certainly had sponsors who have jumped on board for no other good reason than because they love soccer. Maybe their daughter plays on your U11 girls team, who knows. The lead time is usually minimal. You can usually put together a letter and send it out 6 to 8 weeks before the event, and dollars are usually quite small. I have some tournaments that we work with that only sell their donor packages at $100. Just a small donation, they get a plaque at the end of it. Some go higher, some go $300 or $400, but relatively small. Outreach is quite simple. Deliverables are quite simple, and there's your donors. Advertisers will give you money because it makes sense for their business to be in front of your audience. So we're talking about people like local restaurants, local shops, local attractions. You've got 10,000 people coming in for a weekend or longer, and some of them are maybe tacking a few extra days at the end of the event and saying, hey, let's enjoy ourselves while we're here. So those people have a very good, strong business reason to want to be getting a message in front of your audience. Lead time's usually a little longer, 6 to 10 weeks, maybe a little longer, depending on budgets. Some people obviously have to fit it into a budget, so reaching out to them earlier might be appropriate. But in terms of actually being ready to get some coupons or some promotions together, 6 to 10 weeks is often enough. Dollars are a little larger, but then you need to justify those dollars. So you go into someone and getting several $100s out of them. They want to know, okay, how many people did attend, and how many people did redeem these coupons, and how many apps were downloaded, and how many clicks did you get to your website or to your Facebook page. So just be a little bit more ready to give them some kind of ROI. Outreach is usually more involved as well. You've probably got to put a media kit together. You're probably going to need to call people up and set up a meeting, go see them, pitch it to them, and justify them. Some people might even push you off to an ad agency, which is never great. I shouldn't say never great, but often not great. But nonetheless, they're gonna want to know that the numbers that they were promised were actually delivered. And deliverables, yes, they're more involved. You might have to get field signs made. That means lead time. Coupons and promotions may need to be printed. You may have to have a deal with a printer to put those things together, or the client may have to put them together, which means you now have to liaise with the client, whoever that person is who handles that kind of stuff. Maybe an agency again. So that's your advertiser. Definition of a sponsor, in my opinion, is a little bit more. Sponsors will give you money because they want to connect in a meaningful way with your audience. So they don't just want to put a message in front of them. They actually want to make some kind of a connection to them, and have maybe some kind of face-to-face, one-on-one interaction with your audience. Often the categories we're talking about: automotive. I'll tell you about an automotive one in a minute. Financial services, healthcare, sporting goods. And this is where your national and global brands will often come in. Your Coca-Cola might come in something like this. And as I say, I did something with Ford one time. Lead time is usually several months. They will need time to consider their leverage opportunities. They'll need time to sell it internally. There'll be a lot of preparation that needs to be done. They may need to have staff at the event. So there's a lot more work to be done. You need to be reaching out to these people months in advance. Dollars much larger, but again, need to be justified with ROI, just like an advertiser, but also category exclusivity, often a multi-year deal. You're looking to put a whole lot more into the package in the first place, and your deliverables, your outreach will involve a proper customized sponsorship proposal. And I'll tell you a little bit about what we include in our sponsorship proposals. You're going to need perhaps several face-to-face meetings, but certainly at least one or two, and maybe with more than one person and stakeholder at that company. Far more complex, often multi-channel deliverables. So I'll give you a very brief example of a sponsorship package that I put together. This is perhaps one of the more successful ones I've done. Back in the days of the Cape Crusaders, which is a much better name. But I put a deal together with the Ford dealers of New England. Now, this was the days of the old USISL. There were 6 teams in New England. We owned 2 of them, the Worcester Wildfire and the Cape Cod Crusaders. There was a team in Vermont, a team in New Hampshire, a team in Rhode Island, a team in Connecticut, 6 teams. And I put together a New England-wide deal for all of those teams. And here's how the deal began. It started with an ad. And I just had this brilliant idea. And to this day, I still think this is a really terrific tagline. We were dealing at the time, this was the 90s, with the first generation of parents whose children played soccer and they didn't. This was probably the very last generation, because most kids over the last 25 years have been playing soccer when they were kids. But this was the older generation didn't really know the game. The younger generation loved it, and they were coming, those parents were coming to our games. So we put together a tagline. This just came to me in a flash of inspiration. I got into soccer because of my kids. I get into a WinStar because of them too. And the reason I put this together was because, well, I've already identified the audience, but I also started to notice that Ford was spending a lot of money on ads promoting their Ford WinStar minivan, and they were highlighting safety features. And there was a whole bunch of awards they'd won or something, I don't know, safety awards that they'd won. So they had started putting ads together on radio, TV, and newspapers highlighting these safety features. I picked up on that because I pay attention to that stuff because I'm an ad guy. And I thought, oh yeah, I got into soccer because of my kids. I get into this vehicle because of them too. I still think to this day that's a terrific ad. So we put together a spec ad, took it to a local dealer. He said, I like it. You're going to have to speak to my agency. And that's how the whole thing began. So it started there. And what we put together, we put that ad in everybody's program book. We put 2 field signs behind every goal, all 6 venues. We had a booth at each field for one night at each of the 6 venues. So we'd get the local dealer to come with some people, with a vehicle, and set up a little booth where they could answer questions. And then we had the idea that they could win the vehicle at halftime. We had a little halftime contest. If you could kick a soccer ball through the side window of one of these vehicles from 20 yards away or whatever it was, you win it. And we set up an insurance plan with a company called Hole in One Promotions that specializes in these kinds of crazy sports insurance packages. They would cover the cost if somebody actually did it, but they also had rules about what you had to do and how hard you had to make it for them to do that. Had to be completely random. But then the people who signed up to be in this blind draw to see who could win it would end up putting their contact information into a database, which we would then pass on to the dealer so they could follow up afterwards. So there was a real opportunity for the dealer to talk about the vehicle to people who was their ideal demographic and possibly someone to win it. Very high profile and very well done contest. So that's what a sponsorship is. That's what makes it different from just a standard media buy. And that's the sort of thing we need to be looking for if we really want to have a conversation about sponsorships. But in our own minds, as I say, there's nothing wrong with taking a donor and giving them an ad in your program just because they donated. But as long as you in your own mind are recognizing donors are one thing, advertisers another, and sponsors are another. To the average outside view, it might look like they're all just different levels of sponsorship, but I always like to separate them out in terms of these guys don't have a good reason, but they still donate anyway. These guys just want to reach our audience. These guys want to have a real connection with their audience. Okay, so how do you build a prospect list? You source your competition. That's the first thing everyone ever told me when I got into media sales. Whoever is advertising somewhere else, you should be paying attention. That's how I came up with that WinStar ad, okay? Because I was paying attention to where they were advertising. That means magazines and newspapers. We don't see them so much anymore, but they're still around and we certainly should be sourcing them. Radio, local TV, billboards. Pay attention to what they're saying, well, it's a typo, they're saying in their ads. Again, going back to that WinStar thing, if they are promoting a particular aspect of their product, then pay attention to that, pick up on that stuff. We've got a supermarket chain here in New England called Stop and Shop, probably all over the country, but certainly they're pretty big here. And they are promoting, they do ads all the time. And I noticed just in the last few weeks, they've started focusing particularly on their Peapod brand, which is their home delivery brand. I'm seeing this on TV. They're not promoting turkeys at Thanksgiving. They're not promoting how affordable their groceries are. They're promoting this. So I think that's a fantastic market for busy soccer mums and dads who are always shuttling their kids from soccer games to soccer practices to other sports. So that's something that I'm actually going to reach out to them in the coming weeks and see if I can't pitch a sponsorship package to them. Focus on people who already advertise in other places. This is one of my pet peeves. I didn't used to necessarily feel this when I was a sales rep, but when I became a sales manager, this was a really, really big deal for me. If you are spending your time trying to persuade someone who doesn't advertise that they should advertise, you're wasting your time. Not that it can't be done, not that you won't necessarily have success once in a while, but basically you're much better off focusing on people who already advertise and say, you already do advertise, why don't you spend some of that advertising here? Here's why. So I really do get quite hot under the collar when I find I've got a rep working for me who spent 6 months trying to get someone who's never advertised anywhere to advertise with them. Pay attention to companies that sponsor other events that are similar to yours. And when I say similar to yours, I don't mean other soccer tournaments. Obviously, other youth sports, no question, but definitely music festivals, art galleries, corporate events, sponsorships go everywhere, ski resorts. People who are spending money in those kinds of areas are very, very good targets for your proposals. Healthcare is a great category. Real estate is a great category. Automotive is a great category. And you can sort of list them all one at a time and just say, okay, yeah, look how much money hospitals spend in these various venues. Yes, we should reach out to our local hospital. Number 3, assess your inventory and get creative. We talked about logo placements on websites and mobile apps and printed materials, but I'm on the record of saying that this is nowhere near enough anymore. This used to be enough back in the 90s, but not anymore. Ads in programs, mobile apps, social media. Social media is big. If you don't have a very strong and robust social media presence, you need one, because people are really getting into this stuff now. Content marketing through social media platforms, interviews with sponsors, trying to get a little bit more personalization of the brand, try and find out a little bit more about them in terms of what they stand for. Coupons and things like that, they're always good. Field signs, banners, and tents, golf carts, that kind of stuff. Booth space, this is where we start getting into sponsorships, right? Booth space, promotions at field locations. Outside events, there's a growing trend in the industry, the tournament industry, of having online registration. I think that's a terrible missed opportunity, because you could have someone sponsor your registration now, and you could make a big deal of it. You could even have some entertainment at it and have some sponsors meet the teams and meet the coaches and have a booth there or something like that. Instead of having someone sign up online and have all that paperwork taken care of on a computer, you're missing an opportunity to actually have a sponsor opportunity there. Other perks, category exclusivity. That's a big deal for a lot of people, particularly as you get into the sponsorship level. Press releases, custom content, access to your audience before and after your event. Think year round. If you've got a mailing list, then you have that mailing list year round. And if you sign up a sponsor in February and your tournament's not until May, well, you should put a press release together and send that out to everybody in February. And maybe even have some kind of coupon or open house invitation or some sort of reason for them to interact with your new sponsor. Okay, so how do we reach out to prospects? Okay, it does vary. It depends on whether or not we're talking about a donor or an advertiser or a sponsor. At least that's how I've had most success and most productivity thinking of it. So donors generally need some kind of a letter. I like to send a real letter, not an email. Follow up with an email, but definitely a letter first, asking to donate, offering something in exchange. You may want to put an ad in your local book, in your program book, or on your app or something. That doesn't mean they're advertisers. They're still donors in their own mind, but nonetheless, you could put an ad out there. You could give them some kind of a plaque or a gift or what have you. But if you are a non-profit, it's not a bad idea to remind them that you are a non-profit and give them some good example of what you do for the community, and that's often enough to get them to write a check for $200 or whatever. I usually put a little form on the back saying, hey, check this box, 3 boxes, one for each level of sponsorship or donation, and somewhere to put a credit card or envelope to mail a check back. Advertisers, we all need some kind of a media kit. We talked about that. You'll need to involve them in sort of demographic info. What are your numbers? What are the inventory packages that you're offering? And what do they come at? So you might say, look, an ad in the program costs X, a field sign costs Y, some kind of ad on our app or website costs Z. And if you package them all together, you get them for some combined discounted price. Stop by, call, set up a meeting. I'm a great believer in just dropping by. I'm an old newspaper rep. So I used to literally walk in and say, hey, Bill, how you doing? Got a few minutes to chat. If they don't, they'll tell you. Some people will put a sign on the door saying no solicitations. Ignore that, walk in anyway. And that's something I've always found very, very easy to do. Some people are freaked out by the idea of doing that. So if you have to call, call. If you have to email, email. But emails tend to get ignored. We all know how many emails we get a day. Everybody's the same. So don't be surprised if you only send emails if you don't have a whole lot of success. Spec ads. I am a great believer in spec ads. That ad I was telling you about, the Ford Windstar, we had that made up. I walked into a car dealer and dropped that on his desk and say, hey, what do you think of that? And they immediately saw it, understood what it was we were trying to say, and said, yes, you need to speak to our agency. So if you can find a designer on Fiverr, or if you've got someone in an office, or you've got some kind of volunteer in the organization who has a design background, have them create some ads for you and get creative with it, have some fun with it. And that's a whole good way, a terrific way to get someone's attention, is to put together a spec ad. Sponsors need something more elaborate, and this is something that's really important that we understand. A fully customized sponsorship proposal is really what I recommend whenever you're reaching out for someone in that higher level. We're talking about $2,500 to $10,000, that kind of range. And some sponsors get even more than that. Some tournaments I know of get more than that. But let's start there, that sort of 2,500 to 10,000 range. A fully customized sponsorship proposal. I do not like to see anybody sending out multiple cookie cutter proposals where all you've done is gone through with find and replace on your Word document, changing the name of the sponsor from Coca-Cola to Pepsi-Cola to the local hospital or to the local bank or whatever. But at the same time, you don't need to panic. It's not like you have to reinvent the wheel every single time. There are blueprints you can follow that will give you customization without you having to reinvent the wheel every time. So think creatively. I'll tell you what we include in our sponsorship proposals. Four is the category, number 4 in the list, but there are 5 of them, 5 actual ingredients that we include in a sponsorship proposal. First of all, you need an overview of your tournament, your mission, your audience demos and psychos, your most of all, what does your event mean to your people? Now, we have a tournament here on Cape Cod, and Cape Cod has got a very, very special place in the heart of literally millions of people. A lot of people have had vacations here since they can remember, endless summer nights, walking on the beach, clam bakes, all you can imagine when you think of Cape Cod. So what does our tournament mean to these people? It obviously means some of that. You can combine great soccer and a friendly tournament with a few extra days of R&R. And I know there are people on this call who have a similar sort of destination type tournament. Visualization of the sponsorship. Where do they fit in? How does that sponsorship mesh with their key objectives? You should have done some research and have some idea of what their key objectives are. Go back to my Ford sponsorship proposal where I picked up on the fact that safety was suddenly becoming a big selling factor. Think about the Peapod advertising that Stop and Shop is doing right now. You should know what their key objectives are and try and figure out a way to make your tournament fit, or your package of sponsorship fit with those key objectives. Tournament specifics, this is where you put your numbers together. How many people are coming? How many of them are participants, parents, coaches, siblings, etc.? What is your social media presence? What kind of clicks are you getting through to your Facebook page, to your Twitter feed, to your website, to your app, all that good stuff. Some kind of a marketing plan, okay? So exactly what it is are you offering? How many banners, how many field signs, logo placements, all that good stuff. But this is where you want to have at least one big idea. This is the idea. Again, going back to that Ford one where we say, hey, let's do a halftime contest where someone could win a Windstar. That's the big idea that makes the whole thing hang together and makes them think, oh yeah, really gets them thinking about what the possibilities might be. Handling the deliverables. You need to have one person who is charged specifically with this. And that person, this is where people fall down a little bit. That person coincidentally needs to have many of the same skills and personality traits as a tournament director. They should be highly detail oriented. They need to be great at putting checklists together, even better at actually crossing items off that checklist, which is where I always come unstuck. But they should not be the tournament director. You cannot pile more stuff onto the tournament directors to do this. This is someone who's going to have to be dealing with sponsors, dealing with vendors, and making sure that all the deliverables are actually delivered. They cannot be the tournament director. It needs to be someone dedicated for this sole purpose. Every proposal, every agreement, every promise, write it down on a piece of paper and get it to that person so that they can put it into a spreadsheet that outlines every detail of every sponsorship, so that every promise that's been made, someone has a record of it and is checking them off their list. Okay, we took care of that. Oh yeah, this is not part of the typical sponsorship, but yes, we've made this extra promise in order to close the deal, so we need to make sure we get that taken care of for this particular sponsor. They also need to know everybody at the sponsor's office. So let's just say you're dealing with 4 dealers of New England and you've got 6 different dealers in 6 different markets who are going to come there. They need to know who the person is at each of those 6 dealers to invite them in, make sure they've got the booth set up they need, make sure they've got all the materials they need. They probably need to know the contact at the ad agency. If they've got signs that need to be made and printed materials that need to be put together, they need to have those contacts in there. Who is actually making this sign and what is the lead time on that? This person needs to be responsible for all of that stuff. App developers, who's in charge of the app, who needs to be reached out to make sure the app gets updated with the new logo, not the old logo, because they changed it over the last winter, and then execute. It sounds easier than it is. There's an awful lot of work in deliverables, but that's the key to making sure you get your renewal next year. Debrief and renewals. This is the one that usually gets forgotten. Usually we get to the end of the tournament, we breathe a huge sigh of relief, and then we don't want to think about it for 6 months. But that's terrible. And often just as bad is that the debrief is the first time the sponsors actually heard from you since the day they signed the contract. That's not good either, okay, because you should be really keeping them in the loop throughout the entire process. But again, the debrief does depend on the category, whether it's a donor, an advertiser, or a sponsor. Donors, it's really quite straightforward. A small gift, a thank you note, maybe a plaque or a photograph or something, and just some kind of thank you note saying how successful the event was and thanking them for their support. Advertisers are going to want some numbers. They may have an agency that's going to want some numbers. That's where your analytics come in, your web visits, your app downloads, your coupon redemptions, all that good stuff. The sponsors, you're going to need a customized line-by-line debrief. So you basically go through the agreement that you had, you go through all the promises that you made and all the deliverables that you had to deliver, and you just check them off one by one, put them into some kind of a report, and let them know that you gave them everything you said. And hopefully, if you do that, you'll lead to renewals. And again, this depends very much on what category of support we're dealing with. Typically, a donor is not going to make more than a token verbal commitment. They're going to say, oh yeah, we're happy to support you. Thanks a lot. Give us a call next year. You're not going to get them to say in May of 2019, yeah, we're definitely on board to do the same for you in May 2020. That's just not realistic. Advertisers, some will, some won't. The larger ones, you might get them onto a multi-year deal. If you've got a tournament that's growing and your advertising and sponsorship packages are becoming more expensive each year, you might be able to get them to commit to next year by locking in this year's price. And in particular, if they put a lot of money into it by getting field signs made and getting coupons printed or what have you, they may be willing to sign on next year just to make sure that they didn't just spend a whole lot of money on a sign for 1 year. Smaller ones are going to be much like donors. They're not going to be able to make any kind of commitment next year. As far as sponsors are concerned, though, that's different. We recommend 3-year agreements if you can possibly tie them down. Now, often there'll be get-out clauses and things like that, and that's understandable. But if you can get people to be thinking in terms of a 3-year commitment, they're going to get a lot more out of the sponsorship. They're going to be able to build on it year on year, and you're going to be able to have some predictable revenue going forward. And that's a really important part of what we're trying to do here. So it should auto-renew annually. They may have some language in the agreement that says, if we give you 30 days or 60 days notice, we can get out of this thing. Certainly, if you don't fulfill your obligations under the year 1 deliverables, then that gives them a very easy get out. But what you've got to do, if they are going to break it after the first year, you've got to put some language in the agreement that's going to make sure that they break it at a time that's convenient for you. So if you have a tournament in May, I would like to give them no more than 90 days to decide whether they're coming back the next May. So you give them the summer. If they decide that they don't want to be part of it for the following year, they need to let you know no later than September 1st, because you need to find another sponsor if they're going to drop out. So put some sort of language in the agreement that if they are going to drop out after 1 year or 2 years or whatever, you need to know no later than a certain date. The key is, if they're not going to renew, you need to know that as soon as possible. And when the contract comes to an end at the end of year 3, give them a right of first refusal to renew, but they have to exercise that right within a timely enough manner. Okay, we said we were going to discuss 4 things, and I just want to make sure we did it. Yes, 6 easy steps that a tournament can take to supercharge their support. 3 types of support, and how recognizing the difference is very, very important, and how to pitch each one slightly differently for each different category, and then your system of making sure all your deliverables are actually delivered. So we did do all the things we said. And nothing I've said here is fluff or theory. This is stuff that I have learned from years of doing this. It's a tried and tested process, and if you follow the steps, you can generate a lot more in the way of sponsorships and corporate support than you currently are. It doesn't matter if you're new to sponsorships. It doesn't matter if you're strapped for time. As I say, that's often an excuse anyway, because you don't really feel comfortable doing it. You don't really have any confidence, and you're freaked out by the idea of selling. So you're really freaked out, but you actually argue that you're just strapped for time. And I do believe any tournament, as long as they meet the criteria we set out in that first slide, as long as they have a successful tournament, you can do this. And when you do, you're going to have more revenue to fund your programs. You're going to have more prestige from your association with well-known brands, less stress, because you know that the cost of running your club and your tournament is covered by a much, much wider base of revenue streams and the ability to impact more people, which is really what we're doing here this for, right? To help more kids play soccer, to impact more people, and to have more fun doing it. So, another sip. Not sure why you came here today. Maybe you're frustrated and you know you're leaving money on the table when it comes to sponsorships. Maybe you could, you know you should be doing more, and you're somewhere in your gut, you feel intimidated, you don't have confidence, and it kind of makes you feel icky trying to sell people on anything. Some people have this really bad vibe about selling. They think it's evil and bad, and it really isn't. Maybe you're considering bringing someone in, and this is something we do recommend, frankly, that tournament directors who don't have time could bring someone in to do this. But you need tips on how to train them, and you need tips on how to oversee them, because if you don't know anything about selling and your sponsorship person comes in and they haven't had any success, you're not really in a position to troubleshoot and help them overcome those problems. And maybe you just noticed other tournaments who are doing so much better than you in this area, and you're just a little bit jealous and you're the green-eyed monster. So one thing we can assume, though, is that if you stayed this long and listened to me droning on for now 49 minutes, you're serious about trying to get that going. And this is an area that we think we can help with. So I'm going to introduce this to you and see if this is something that you think might be able to help you. It's an online training program called, as this masterclass is called, Scoring with Sponsors. Essentially, we're going to take all the things we've talked about here and go much, much deeper and actually show folks how to do it. So exactly what is it? It's a step-by-step guide to building a successful sponsorship program for your soccer tournament. So it is very much focused on soccer tournaments, the kinds of people who are spending money on soccer. By the way, I noticed that VW has just sponsored the women's national team to a huge sum of money. These are the sorts of things we need to be noticing. Designed to take you by the hand as you build profitable relationships with your local business community. This is the long game stuff. A lot of this is just about building relationships. They may not come in this year, but they'll come in next year, but you build the relationship over time. Come on. Don't stop me in my prime. There we go. There's no missing steps. We take you through the whole process step by step, no confusion, no intimidation. We will work with you on scripts so that you know what to say when you leave messages, you know what to say in emails, you know what to say when you get into meetings, and no icky sales tactics. And this is the quickest, the fastest, and most effective way to turn sponsorship into a major revenue stream for your tournament. What is exactly included is 6 weekly modules. So there's 6 steps that I showed you. We put them each into one module and put a weekly module together. 24/7 lifetime access, downloads of key materials you'll need. So we'll put together a template of a media kit and show you how to fill in the details for your own event. Swipe files, a community of smart and savvy sponsorship directors with whom to share ideas and best practices. I talked a little bit about the Tournament Talk community that we have on Facebook. We may move it off Facebook in time because I'm not a big fan of Facebook, but nonetheless, the idea that there's a community of people who are all facing very similar challenges and talking about them with one another, sharing ideas, sharing war stories is really quite important. So imagine if generating sponsorships was systematized, even, dare I say, effortlessly. It'll never be completely effortless. It is hard work, but nonetheless, if you know what you're doing, it's a lot easier than some people think it is. The local business community, some of them were even calling you. And I've had that. People have called me up and say, we like what you're doing and we'd love to sponsor you. If you didn't have to constantly worry about how to increase the number of teams you're bringing in because you've got this other very substantial revenue stream. And I see so many tournaments struggling to bring more teams in, and they say, we don't have enough fields, so let's rent some more fields. And now they've got their tournament spread out over 15 different fields, and that's a challenge. And whole set of new challenges. They don't have enough refs, or they have enough refs, but they're not good refs. So you have all kinds of complaints about some blown off side call or something. So we think that we can help you with that, because if you bring sponsorship revenues up to where they need to be, you can avoid that growth, those growing pains. And if multi-year agreements and a high renewal rate meant that you could actually predict future revenue year on year, wouldn't that be something? So scoring with sponsors, all you have to do is follow the steps, and here is what it actually will look like. 6 modules. Audience. Who's your audience? How to survey them, psychographic and demographic profiles, and much, much more. But basically, step 1, know your audience so that you can go and talk intelligently with your prospects about your audience. What does your prospect list look like? 3 types of prospects, researching your prospects, and coming up with a good prospect to audience match. Again, go back to that 4 Dealers of New England. The parent whose children played soccer, they didn't really understand the sport, but they've grown to love it. And they're the very same people who could be reached with a nice, well-targeted WinStar ad. Inventory and pricing, what is it you've got to sell? Coming up with some creative sponsorship proposals and come up with some crazy ideas like, hey, let's win a car at halftime. That Peapod idea that I was telling you about, win a month worth of free home delivered groceries. Pictures for each prospect list. So just help you with the template for the letter you need to send to potential donors, help you with a media kit that you're going to put together for your advertisers, and helping you with individual sponsorship proposals that you put together for your sponsors, and how to pitch them and how to sell. And that's a whole course in itself, of course, selling. But nonetheless, we can help you with some of the tricks of the trade, so to speak. Onboarding and deliverables, delivering what you promised, managing the expectations of the client, keeping your client in the loop throughout the entire process, and how to stay organized, because that really is where the rubber hits the road, making sure that you do give them what you promised. And then debrief and renewal, there's your 6 modules. So it does have a cost. This part is free, and you're welcome to just walk away with what I've done here, and that's fine. It's a great place to start. But if you want to go a little deeper, then we have this paid program. You could hire an experienced sponsorship rep or a consultant, and we do some of this. They usually charge a pretty hefty upfront fee, some kind of a retainer or something, and a sizable commission. You could try bringing in someone who doesn't charge those things. They come in maybe on a commission-only basis, and that has worked. I've been on both sides of the commission-only conundrum, and there's pros and cons to it, without a doubt. But typically, if you're only going to bring someone in who's got very little experience and commission only, you're going to have patchy results at best, particularly if they don't have proper training and proper oversight. You could muddle through and leave it on the sponsors, the tournament director's to-do list, where we all know what that means. That means they're going to get to it at the last minute, if at all, and another year is going to go by, and they're never actually going to get done. And of course, that becomes a huge opportunity cost. If we believe, and I do believe, that there's tens of thousands of dollars potentially on the table for a good-sized tournament, then imagine the cost of just letting another year slip by without selling any sponsorship. So the bigger question is, what might it cost if you don't invest in this training? So here's what we are actually going to put it together for. When we launch this for real, because this is not a real launch, this is a founder's launch, a beta launch, if you will. When we launch this for real, we're probably going to charge somewhere in the region of $500. At that rate, you've only got to get one sponsor or one advertiser on board, and it pays for itself. But our goal is for you to at least see a 10x return on investment for this. So if we get you to buy it for $500, you execute, you learn, you go through the process, you go through the modules, you ought to be able to generate 10 times that much in potential revenue. But right now, for a limited number of people, well, I'll go through exactly what that means in a moment, we are putting it together for a fraction of that cost, because this is, as I say, a soft founders launch. This is a brand new program. We're still working out the kinks. We need important feedback from you guys as to exactly what it is you're struggling with, so that we can put the content together to match what your needs are. I have sent some emails out to people and got some good feedback from them, but we want people to actually go through the course, interact with us, tell us what they need more help with, what they need more content about. And for that, and hopefully to get some good testimonials at the end, we are willing to put this together for basically half price, $247, half price, or 3 monthly payments of $97, which does come to slightly more than $247, but that's the nature of installment plans. So in addition to the 6 modules, 4 additional bonuses to make it even more attractive. If you're too busy to do this for yourself, hiring for sponsors is a little bonus module that we're going to put together to help you bring someone in. Exactly what does that look like? How do these compensation packages work? I have been on both sides. I have hired people. I have slipped in some terrible pitfalls from hiring people. I'll tell you about one of them if I have time later. And so we can put together a little program that helps you put somebody else other than the tournament director on the trail, pounding the pavement, making the calls, setting up the meetings. So that's number 1. Number 2 is a fast start checklist. Whenever you get a big training program like this, often you feel, oh my God, I can't even start doing this until I've gone through every module. And we do recommend you go through every module, and we do recommend you come back to us and ask for more modules if you feel you need more help in certain areas. But that said, you want to get going, we can give you the 10 things you need to do right now to get your first sponsor within the next 30 days. Sponsorship case studies. We are talking to and working with people all the time in this space, whether it be through the apps or through the magazine, by interviewing people, through the podcast we're going to be launching shortly. So we are dealing with people all the time who do a terrific job of putting these sponsorship packages together. We will talk to them. We will get their permission to share as much as they're willing to share, and we will give you inspiration and great ideas from doing case studies of some of our friends in the industry who are doing a terrific job of this already. And as I've already mentioned this before, this is, I think, priceless. The ability to get involved in a community of like-minded people who are all going through very similar challenges. I have people questioning me all the time saying, well, how much do people charge? Well, let's go to the Facebook group and ask. You know, I put this proposal together. I'm not sure if it's really working. Can someone take a look at it and give me some feedback? All of that stuff can be done within the community of people, plus your wins, plus your losses, your hard knocks, because there are hard knocks in the sales business. And that's another bonus we're putting together. So we also have a 60-day money-back guarantee. So if you go through the course, you go out there and try and close a few deals, you just don't get anywhere, you can't do it, you don't understand the modules, we'll give you a money-back guarantee. Essentially, you do have to do the work. We don't want you to just buy it, leave it on a shelf, and then come back 59 days from now and ask for your money back. That's not good for anybody. But if you give a good faith effort and you don't have any success and you get back to us within 60 days, we will give you 100% of your money back, no questions asked. All you have to do is reach out to our support at scoringwithsponsors.com. So to sum up, we've got 6 modules: audience, prospects, inventory, sales, deliverables, and debriefing renewals. We've got 4 bonuses: hiring, fast start checklist, sponsorship case studies, and the Facebook community, all for $247. But that price is only good for the first 25 enrollees. Okay, I don't want to have a huge group in this first class. We want to have it be a manageable size, and I certainly don't want to have a huge group if we're giving it away at half price. So 25 people. There are 2 deadlines here. Either we're going to sell 25 enrollees and then we're going to close it, or we're going to leave it open until Tuesday night at midnight. Okay, I understand people can't necessarily make an instant decision right now. They may need to talk to people on their board. They may need to get the expense approved. I get that. And we are going to send a replay of this out so you can share it with other people and decide in the next few days if this is something you want to invest in. But we're not going to leave it open indefinitely. And if the first 25 people come in the next 24 hours, we're going to close it as soon as the 25th one comes in. So that's how that's going to look. So here's what to do. You can go to scoringwithsponsors.com. Everything is all set up there. There's a little sales page. You can scroll down to the bottom, and if you do that, this is what you will see. And I wanted to just bring this up as a last minute change, if you will, because we sent an email out right at the very beginning of promoting this webinar, and we asked people to give us the biggest challenges they're facing. And we got at least a dozen people come back to us and say, the biggest challenge we have is that we don't have anybody to do it. Now, I believe, as I've said in this course, that these will be a great way for you to bring someone in and hire them and train them and get them working for you. But if you really, really can't do that, you just don't know who to call, you don't have any way to do it, we are willing for a very, very limited number of people to potentially do that for you. We have sales reps in this area. Many of you know Sinead, in particularly know me, and we've got people we could bring in who would potentially do this. So I put this third option as really a trial balloon, to be honest with you. I have no idea if people are interested in this. I have no idea if it's going to be a good fit for us even, but there's definitely a need. There's no question about it. So 3 options: either the 97 times 3 option, click and roll here, either the 247 one-time option, click and roll there. The third option, $497 monthly retainer. Okay, we're not going to do this for free. This is something that's going to be a substantial investment from your part. We want to talk to you before we make any firm commitments. And if we decide it's not a good fit, obviously we'll refund the money, of course. But nonetheless, a monthly retainer plus a substantial commission. We talked about that in the earlier slide, right? We want some kind of a payment plus some kind of a commission. So this is not for everybody. And even if you think it is for you, I might not agree. I want to know what kind of prospect list you've got. I want to know what kind of person you have at your end handling the deliverables. I want to know what kind of tournament you run. We prefer people who run multiple tournaments, although that's not necessarily a deal breaker. But if you've got one tournament that attracts 100 teams and it's 3 weeks from now and you want me to sell sponsorships for you, that ain't going to work. So we'll have a conversation, but before we even have that conversation, click here, and I'm going to limit that to 10 clients. I can't take on more than that. I'm not even sure I can handle 10, to be honest with you, but they've got to be the right kinds of clients, and it's got to be something that works for both of us. And I may not get a single person on there. I have no idea, but I did get a lot of feedback from people saying, I need someone to do this for us. We can't do this ourselves, even if you give us all the tools we need. We just don't have anyone to do it. If that is you, and if you feel that you're willing to make that kind of a commitment, and you feel that you've got something that we can sell for you, then let's at least have a conversation. So those are your 3 options. So with that said, we have just crossed the hour mark, hour and 4 minutes, which isn't bad. I wanted to do it all in 1 hour, but what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pull out of here. I'm going to go stop sharing screen. And if anybody has any questions, I'd love to hear from you. So I've got a couple of minutes that I have put aside for questions. Anybody's got some, but I do have this. Often what happens when you do one of these presentations and you say, hey, anybody got any questions? People get shy and they don't want to ask. They don't want to be the first to ask. So I got a bunch of questions that I already have from other people. As I said to you, I sent out the heads up email. You may have received it, letting people know we were doing this training and asking people to give us some questions that they felt they needed to answer. So while people are getting up the courage to ask their own questions, I'll answer a couple of these, and we can then use that to sort of break the ice. And if nobody's got any questions, that's also perfectly fine, because you know, we have done an hour and my voice is starting to crack a little bit. But let me just share a couple of these with you, because these are real people who are just like you, who have made, you know, a challenge, have really struggled to get this going. Micah says, for us, it's pretty simple. A lack of a dedicated salesperson for sponsorships is what's preventing us from attracting sponsors. We have staff in place to handle the execution. We just don't have anybody making calls and reaching out to businesses that may be interested. Well, there you go. We talked about that here. Either potentially we could do it for you. I don't know if that's a good fit, but certainly if this training is something that can be handed to somebody else, I think when you're hiring someone, that person not only needs to feel, unless they're an absolute expert in sales, and of course if they are, then they're going to be expensive. That's, you know, they're hired, trained professionals. But if you're looking to get someone in, a volunteer parent or a relatively inexpensive entry-level position, you're going to have to do more than just hire them and send them out there. You're going to have to give them some training. You're going to have to give them some oversight. You're going to have to give them some materials so that they don't spend the first 3 months putting together a media kit, which is also another thing that I've seen a lot of in experienced sales reps. They're intimidated by picking up the phone, so they'd rather spend their time working in Photoshop or whatever, putting a fantastic media kit together. Let me ask another one. Blake, recognizing who to reach out to that may be interested in sponsoring a youth event. Well, the first thing I would argue with that, Blake, is that we shouldn't necessarily be focusing on the youth. This is a highly attractive demographic, not because they are teenagers who play soccer, but because they are families who are committed to soccer. Teenagers generally don't have credit cards. Teenagers don't buy cars. Teenagers don't take foreign vacations. Their families do. So what we have to do when we're putting our demographic profile together, when we're going out there and surveying our audience, it's just as important to find out what the father and the mother are thinking, and possibly what they earn and possibly what they spend their money on, as it is to worry about the fact that there's a teenage 14-year-old boy or 14-year-old girl who's part of this family. It really is a family-wide thing, and don't just think about youth teams. Mike says, very similar actually, saying, hey, we're trying to reach out to people, we can't find enough people. Mitch, here's one for Mitch. We have multiple sites for our events, and sponsors prefer one super complex of 25 fields, and our largest is 13 to 18. Mitch, I love you, man, but I don't agree with you. There are people on this very call who also run their tournament over multiple fields and multiple locations who do a fantastic job with sponsorships, and you can too. 13 to 18 fields is a big field, a big facility, and you can certainly have a lot of sponsor interaction with all the activity you've got ongoing with a 13-field facility. Time to develop a strategy. Frank says the biggest challenge is having the time to develop a strategy. I'm sure I would be the best candidate to do this, as I understand the many facets of the event our club and community has to offer. But I'm so busy running the tournament and running the club that marketing to potential sponsors takes a back seat. Classic. How many times have I heard that? Well, first of all, Frank, let me tell you, I disagree. You are not the right person to do this. Even if you are the tournament director, even if you know more about this event than anybody else, you are not the right person to do it for all the reasons you say yourself. You don't have time, you've got an event to run. So you really should be thinking about bringing somebody in who can handle that. One more here. Sandy in Ohio. I know Sandy well. Truth be told, it's finding an internal contact to take the time to look for sponsors and actually hit the streets to find those companies to sponsor our tournaments. We used the app to show ROI in the past. I'm glad to know they actually use our app, which is great. But we also need to hire someone for the tournaments to really go out there and get the contacts going. Absolutely true. I do agree with your premise that someone needs to be hired to actually do this. And this training, hopefully, is something that you could use as a good incentive for someone to come and do it. We're going to give you all the training you need. But at the same time, having someone dedicated who isn't worrying about whether the fields have been lined, they're more worried about whether the 50 phone calls that needed to be made got made. That's a much, much better situation. Here's one. Lee, the biggest challenge is getting parents motivated to find sponsors which will benefit their own child's team. If you're still in the place where you're haranguing parents to go out there and sell your sponsorships for you, I think you're coming at this from the wrong place. Yes, parents can be very helpful. There's no question. They know people. They maybe even run businesses of their own. But if you are trying to get a already harassed parent who's getting their kid from practice to fields to games in multiple sports, multiple children, also getting them to music lessons and recitals, and then you're on their case, I have trouble getting parents to man a concession stand for 2 hours. The idea that I could get a parent to take the time and the effort necessary to sell these sponsorships, I think that's unrealistic. And I think, again, you need to be thinking about hiring someone and training them to do that kind of work. Okay, Shelley, need to run. Thank you. Good info. Excellent. Mark, can I give you a couple of sponsors I found in the last few weeks? I'd love to see it. Yes, if you found some and you can share the names. Host 3 tournaments a year. Is it a good idea to package all 3 tournaments to sponsors or keep them separated? I would package them together. I think if you've got some significant numbers are important. They're not the be all and end all when it comes to sponsorships. They are for advertisers, but not for sponsorships. But certainly, if you've got multiple tournaments, it would be a great idea to package them and say, okay, you can now have a year-round presence in our tournament series. Brandon, Full Fury in September. Okay, that's an introduction. That was from earlier. Okay. For another conversation offline, I contacted Soccer Tournament Guide and filled out a form. Okay, we'll talk about that later. We've got a support group that will handle that. Okay, that's all for the questions. So what I think would be a great idea is, if you are excited by the idea of jumping in on this, we'd love to have you be in on it. If you want us to at least consider the idea of representing you and doing it for you, fill out the form on the done for you option. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a done deal. We'll have a conversation. We'll see if it's a good fit. And if it's not, we'll refund that money. That's not a problem. But I do want to see some kind of commitment from you and your end. And then what I'll do is I will send a replay of this out to everybody who was on the call and everybody who registered and couldn't make it. I did get a call from Sarah Thomas saying she would love to be in. She signed up, but she can't make it because she's out of power. She's in one of these areas that's being hit by the terrible cold weather. So God bless her, and I hope she's keeping warm, but we'll send out a replay, not just to the people who were here, for the people who couldn't make it. And the reason we do that is because I do recognize you're going to have to go out and perhaps see some other folks, talk about some, whether this is in the budget. It's not a huge expense, but it is an expense, and I appreciate that. And sometimes you just don't have the authority to make that without somebody else's signature on the check. So I get that. So we'll send out the replay. We would also send out a bunch of reminders, but between now and Tuesday evening, if you want to jump in on this, jump in, and do bear in mind that it might not even last until Tuesday evening, because the first 25 will lock the door once the 25th person comes in. So with that said, thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for staying till the end. And if we can help you sell more sponsors, we would love to do that. Thanks very much. Goodbye.